teacher knows the value of having strong classroom management skills. But what do you do if you don't? Or what do you do if you are an instructional coach who is trying to support a teacher who needs help with student behavior? I'm Allison Dowda from A Double Dose of Dowda, and in this video I am specifically talking to teachers and instructional coaches who are working through improving classroom management. Now, I have this unofficial theory. I believe that the cause of most classroom behavior problems comes from one of three root causes. Now, I haven't done any official studies on this. I am basing this on my own personal experience in my own classroom and other classrooms that I have visited. And I may certainly be leaving something out. But here's what I want us to do. I want for us to think of these three root causes for behavior problems in students as three buckets. There's the social emotional bucket, there's the environment bucket, and then there's the task bucket. Now, I'm going to go into each of these in a little more detail so you can better understand what I'm talking about. Let's look at this first bucket that I want to talk about, and that's the social emotional bucket. So in this bucket, if you can imagine a bucket, students are in this bucket and their behavior problems are rooted because they have a lack of their physical needs being met. Maybe they aren't getting enough sleep for whatever reason at night. Maybe they aren't getting enough food in their bellies. If they don't have those needs being met, then their behavior is not going to be appropriate for a classroom. Another reason they might be in this social emotional bucket is because they are seeking attention. They are seeking attention either from peers in class and wanting to, get power and attention from them, or maybe they're seeking out attention from the teacher. Another reason that students may be misbehaving from this social emotional bucket is perhaps there is just some pain that has been caused to them by others that they are taking out on other students or on the teacher. And so sometimes there are aggressive behaviors that have some other root cause, some anger issue for something in their lives. So that is the social emotional bucket. The second bucket that I refer to is the classroom environment. So sometimes students are misbehaving because the classroom environment isn't what it needs to be. Maybe there is inconsistency in the rules and procedures and routines that the teacher has set. Maybe there are extra long transition times. The pacing is off in the classroom, and so students are given these opportunities where they don't know exactly what they're supposed to be doing, so they fill that time doing something that they want to do. A third reason that a classroom environment may be causing poor student behavior is the idea of having poor proximity. What I mean by that is the teacher is not near the students. The number one thing a teacher can do to improve student engagement is to physically be closer to them. So if a teacher is standing at the front of the room all the time teaching and the misbehaving student is placed in the back, the farthest away from the teacher, then that lends itself to behavior problems and is probably going to set up some issues down the road. So that's the environment bucket. The third bucket that I think can cause poor student behavior is what I call the task bucket. So what I mean by that is that the tasks that students are being asked to do, either one, they're unclear on the expectations. They don't understand the directions. You gave them all these directions from the start. You've seen those lessons where there's a long list of like 18 things that a kid has to remember in that order to do, and then the teacher gets upset when they don't do it. So unclear expectations can be part of that task bucket. Maybe the task itself is not engaging. I don't know if you've ever seen the YouTube video. It's called The Friggin' Packets. And there's a high school student who just kind of goes off in a classroom one day about having to do these, quote, friggin' packets, because he just keeps getting given these packets and he's doing these packets and he's tired of doing packets. And let's just be honest, who wouldn't get tired of doing packets day after day after day? So perhaps the task is not very engaging. The other thing that could be happening is that the task is not at the right level for the student. Either it's too easy or it's too difficult. So in that case, that can mean that if you have a child that's a struggling reader, if the directions that are there are not given to them in at their appropriate reading level, then that can cause trouble. Also, if it's a reading intensive task, whether that's in reading or math or social studies or science, whatever the subject area is, if students can't get through the text because it's so far above their lexile, then they're probably not going to engage with good behavior that you would want. Even if it's not a problem with reading, it could be an issue of whatever the task is, whatever that skill is. Maybe it's too difficult for the student. Maybe there's not good scaffolding there so that the student can work his or her way up to that grade level standard. Or maybe it's too easy and there's not an extension that has been planned in the lesson. And so the student gets finished with it, or maybe even doesn't do it because he or she is bored with the task and just wants to find something else to do because it's going to be too simple. So for students who don't have the maturity and the self-regulation, this task bucket is very possibly a problem that's causing more student misbehaviors. So here's what I want us to do. I want to try something a little bit different than I usually do in these videos, but I think you're going to like it because whether you are a teacher who's dealing with these issues yourself, or if you are an instructional coach who is helping a teacher go through these struggles, then what I'm going to do is take you through step by step a coaching session that I would do with teachers who are having these behavior problems. What's really cool about this is if you are a teacher going through this video right now because you are having behavior problems, what I want for you to do is pause after every question and just make some notes for yourself of what you're hearing. If you are an instructional coach checking out this video, what I want for you to do is just listen this first time through and for me to explain my thinking to you. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to tell you how you can get a one-page printout of all of these questions that I'm asking so that whenever you have a meeting with a teacher, you can just take that little printable sheet of paper and you can adapt it to however you need it. And then you have these questions that you can ask teachers whenever you have your next coaching session. So let's get started with this. Now, for essentially every coaching conversation that I have some different protocols. So some different questions that I have pre-thought out and designed specifically for those teacher meetings for different situations. So for this one, I'm going to take you through my usual sequence of questions that you'll see on these slides. And so here's my sequence that I'm going to take you through. The first thing is with every teacher meeting, I always establish the purpose of that meeting. I'm going to tell you the questions that I would ask in this particular meeting as well as every step along the way. But we're going to establish a purpose. We are going to explore ideas, we're going to make a plan, we are going to determine our evidence, and we are going to talk about next steps and reflection on how the meeting went. So let's jump right in. The very first thing that I want to do whenever I meet with a teacher is to establish the purpose for our meeting. I want to know clearly where they are coming into the meeting and where they want to be leaving the meeting. So here are the questions that I would ask a teacher in a coaching session about classroom behavior problems. So the first thing that I want to know is what are the current student behaviors that you see happening in the classroom? Just what's going on. This is positive and negative. The second question that I would ask, and these next two kind of go together, is how do you as the teacher currently respond to positive student behaviors? And how do you as the teacher currently respond to negative student behaviors? Now don't lump these together. Think about them separately, but I'm just asking them now at the same time because they are so similar. My next question that I ask teachers is, what would you like both the student and teacher behaviors to look like? So at the end of this section of establishing a purpose, this is helpful for me because I know what behaviors are happening from the students, I know how the teacher is responding, and I now know how the teacher would like for behaviors to look. And hopefully we're planting some seeds here so that the teacher is also starting to understand that not only will there be some student behavior changes that have to happen, but there also may need to be some teacher behavior changes that need to happen. The next section of my protocol is this exploring ideas section. So what I would do next is I would share with the teacher that I'm working with this idea of the 3 buckets that I've shared with you. I would share the social emotional bucket, the environment bucket, and the task related bucket, all as root causes of behavior problems. The next thing I would do is I would ask them, so what are you thinking about this? Now that we've already talked about what our purpose is, what's happening in your classroom, and what you want to happen, and hearing about these root causes, what are you thinking? And then I'm going to ask them, the next question is, so what else? Because I want them to really dig deeper and really have some thoughtful responses to everything that they've heard so far about where they want to be and these root causes of behaviors. So I'm going to ask them what else, and then I might have to ask that a couple more times until I get to the next question, which is, so what's the real challenge? What's really going on here? Because sometimes the first thing that you think is the problem, maybe that is the problem, but sometimes it's not. And so we just want to go a few layers deeper, ask why a few times, and get a better answer for what's really the challenge that's going on here. Then I would ask the teacher, so what do you see as some possible options here? What are some maybe solutions that could work? If there's an opportunity and I feel like the teacher is open to it, I might say, well, I do have one strategy in mind that I think might fit your teaching style, or however you want to frame it. Would you be open to hearing one idea that I have for a strategy you could use for student behavior? They're definitely going to say yes. But then the next thing that's really important is not only do you ask them if you can share it, but then after you do, and keep it brief, keep it short, but after you do, you ask them, okay, how could you modify this to fit your needs and to fit your classroom? Because anything that I as a coach recommend, I'm not in that classroom day in and day out, and I certainly can't think that I know everything that's happening in that space. And so the teacher can have some more insight, and things might take modification because no 2 teachers are the same, no 2 students are the same. So give them the opportunity to modify whatever you have shared, no matter how great you think it is. Then the next question in this section is, how might this strategy or whatever idea they have come up with as options, how might this help you reach your goal? And remind them of what the goal was from that first phase of establishing their purpose. The third section of my protocol is the plan. So now you and I, as a teacher and coach together, we need to make a plan for what you're going to do. What are you going to try to see how it works? So my first question in this section is, how might you use what we've talked about today? Just leave it open like that. Don't feed them things that they have to do. If it helps at this point, it might be a good time to review. If they don't have a quick answer, then maybe you need to review from your notes the things that you have talked about in this session. What were some of the ideas that were generated? So then, to remind them, how could you use what we've talked about today? The next question is, what type of support do you need from me? They may say, I think I just need some more ideas. They might say, I think I really need to see this modeled. Is this something that you could come in and co-teach a lesson with me and help me out with? Maybe they need some extra articles or research or something else. Whatever it is, leave the door open, because in this partnership of coaching, they are doing work and you are doing work. You're doing this together. So this is not an opportunity to say, all right, good luck with this, and leave them to this. They need to know that they have your support and know that you are a partner in this work together. So the next piece of this protocol, the next section, is the evidence section. Now I will tell you, this is a piece that often gets overlooked, and teachers and instructional coaches can miss how valuable this is. So really focus in on this for a second. There are 2 questions along with evidence that I like to ask teachers about working with classroom behavior. The first is, what evidence will we collect to determine if our plan was successful? Here's what I mean by that. So is it the sort of thing where it would be appropriate for me as the instructional coach to come observe in your classroom? And if the behavior that we're trying to break is how often the teacher is having to stop instruction in order to correct behaviors. So I will go in as the instructional coach, and maybe I will do tally marks of how often instruction gets interrupted because the teacher is addressing behavior problems. Now, that very first time would be a great baseline. Then the teacher can start implementing some of the strategies that you have talked about, and that's going to go into the second question when it comes to evidence, which is, how will you determine success based on this evidence? So, if in your baseline, and this might be a good conversation to come back to later, but in your baseline, if the teacher has to interrupt his or her instruction 20 times in a lesson, according to your tallies, because there are so many disruptions, then maybe we say a good goal for the next step is going to be, let's cut it in half. Let's try for 10. And then the next step can be an even lower goal. I think you can try and start off and say, well, what would be a reasonable amount? Well, maybe 2 times in a lesson would I have to, stop instruction. Really, we want to get to 0. But in that case, that teacher is going to be so disheartened if they were at 20 and they're trying to get to 2, and if they go through those disruptions very quickly, those interruptions to instruction very quickly, they're going to feel like a failure for the rest of that class. All they're going to think is, well, I didn't hit my goal. So maybe start with a goal that's a little easier to meet first, and then you can continue to improve. So that's the evidence piece. The final component of this are my always kind of follow-up is the same. Next steps and reflection. So in next steps, I ask the teacher, so talk to me about the action plan. What are you going to do? What are we going to do together? What are your next steps? What are my next steps? Those sorts of things. So we just want to kind of tidy this up and be able to know exactly what we're doing next. And then lastly, this is another one that's easy to skip over and to forget to ask teachers. But lastly, I ask them to reflect on today's session. So in this coaching session, what was most helpful to you? Now, don't ask the teacher, was this helpful for you? Don't give them the option to say, Instead, you need to phrase it so what in today's coaching session did you find most helpful? And so you're setting it up so that they have to have something that they can reflect on and that they can share. Again, this might be a time if you want to first run down all the things that you did together that you discussed, or ask the teacher to run down and then share what was helpful. That's a great idea. That's a great thing to do. So that is my protocol for the questions that I work through with teachers whenever they are having classroom behavior problems. Now, I have a free list of every question that I asked, and all of my sections are there. There's a free list of these questions that you can work through with teachers if you're an instructional coach, or if you are a teacher and you want to just stick this somewhere, maybe in your lesson plan book, so that you can reflect on it from time to time. And if this comes up again, you can ask yourself these same questions and kind of go through and coach yourself. I would love for you to get this downloaded, and I would also love to hear your thoughts on these 3 root causes, these 3 buckets for classroom behavior, as well as this coaching protocol. What did you think? This is my first time to share this with coaches and with teachers, and so I would love to hear just what do you think about me sharing these protocols with you. Leave me any notes in the comments, and I look forward to reading them.
As always, thanks for watching, and we would love for you to subscribe to our channel.